Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another episode review from the classic Are You Afraid of the Dark television series. This episode comes from season 4. It was written by Gerald Wexler and directed by David Winning. And the episode in question is The Tale of the Long Ago Locket. I'm going to be upfront. I've never been a fan of this episode, and I think I've seen this now maybe 3 times in my life. And each and every time I watch it, I notice more and more things I just don't like about it. And that's saying something here. Are You Afraid of the Dark, in terms of kids' horror, is a big pantheon for me. I do have a lot of admiration for this show. And this is almost like the precursor of what The Haunting Hour came to be. And I think The Haunting Hour, for that show being such a hodgepodge of variety of different horror storytelling, or maybe lack thereof, that concept for that show felt like an improvement of this in the long scheme of things. But I can also see a lot of the charm the show had back in the day. And for the show having some sort of legacy in the fact that it just had more variety than something like a Goosebumps did, this episode feels really out of place. And a lot of it comes down to just the mishandling of the idea, and it's very forgettable. And if it is memorable, it's for the leading star in it. Or maybe the set pieces, but that's about it. This is such a forgettable episode. And I think I've cemented my opinion on this even further now, rewatching this for a review purpose. So off the bat, do I recommend that you go out of your way to watch The Tale of the Long Ago Locket? No. But I do think that if you catch it in like a binge setting where you're watching a handful of episodes at a time and you put on season 4, this is pretty much right in the beginning of the season. Catch it that way. Don't select this episode out of the repertoire to be your first Are You Afraid of the Dark episode. Don't select this one if you haven't seen much of the show. Don't do it. But if you do it, I can maybe see why you might like some things about it, because there is some redeeming aspects we'll get into near the end of the video. But let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So the story starts off like every typical Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, where the Midnight Society comes in and they're about to tell a tale of woe or scares, or maybe some cautionary tale that's not really scary. In the case of this one, it's definitely the latter of them. And the story starts off with a high schooler named Jimmy. And Jimmy is daydreaming in his class about, I guess, this crush he has. And he's not really paying attention to the history lesson all that much. And I guess he's in his mind because he's trying to work up courage to ask out his friend. And his friend is like this cute little girl type archetype. She has a bunch of guy friends that surrounds her. There's another suitor that's also friend zoned, I guess, trying to hang out with her. And Jimmy finally gets the urge to go ask her out on a date to go to a skating rink. But it turns out she already has plans to go to this movie with this other friend that they all hang out with. So Jimmy's essentially like a third wheel, but so is the other guy. So it's weird. So Jimmy gets caught up in his feels, and he heads out to the park to kind of just blow off some steam and be to himself. And he notices a couple like holding hands, and it's kind of cringy, the way he's just like staring at them. And once they notice him, he tries to go hide off in the woods and play it off cool. But when he does that, he's greeted by a man with like a very old rifle, and he's like, oh, "Come on, we gotta escape. The British are coming," or whatever. And he's like, "What's going on?" And he's acting like this might be like a reenactor or something. And he gets taken to like this ravine area, and he starts hearing, people coming up to him, and he thinks that he sees a gun with a bayonet attached to it being shoved in his face, and he's screaming, hiding in the dirt. And he thinks that this man is next to him, but when he comes to, he's back in his present time, and all these kids that he goes to school with, including the girl that he likes and his other third wheel friend, look on to him like, "What's wrong with you?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm just hanging out, doing whatever, trying to blow it off, trying to play it cool." And they all leave him alone. But then he finds a locket on the ground, and he's like, well, this is strange. And he takes this locket to like a local historian to get it looked at, and it looks to be around the 1700s, or it looks to be really old. And he's like, well, I want to keep it, but let me go see if I can, replicate this. So he decides to go out of his way after talking with his after talking with one of his friends again, to go back into the woods. And then he meets up with this man again, finds out his name is like Lieutenant William, and he is basically being hunted by the Redcoats for execution, to be hung. And he gives them a knife to hold on to in case they get ambushed or whatnot. And he's like, this is crazy. And Jimmy just can't believe this. But he finds out pretty much how this time travel stuff works. He narrowly escapes another British attack, for example. He heads back to his time. He goes back to the town historian, and he shows him the dagger. And the town historian actually wants to buy it off of him because it puts it into that time period of 1780, which is the year revealed by the man when Jimmy asks him, like, where are they? What time period are they in? And Jimmy is given a book by this town historian, which goes back to this town I think they're in called Harrisville. And the history of Harrisville is like a very old book. He opens it up and finds the story of Lieutenant William. And he had this love interest, but he was pretty much, inciting, revolution over, I guess, in Canada where this is filmed, or it might be pseudo-United States here. And he was executed for his crimes. And then he realizes, he like stands up in the middle of his classroom in this epiphany moment, like very goofy. And he's like, well, I know what I have to do now. I have to possibly save him from this. So he tells his friends about what's been happening to him. And his friends think that he's been kind of crazy for a little bit. And I guess the girl's kind of worried for him. But he borrows this jukebox from the other third wheel friend, and he brings it out to the woods where he knows that this man is going to be captured. And it all plays into like this anniversary of his death, because when he looks at the calendar, it's like September 17th, which is the I guess anniversary every year of this man who died, Lieutenant William, because he died in that year of 80 or whatnot. I think that's what it said. So the rest of the plot, he takes the boombox back in time with him, and he sets up by some trees, by this hanging tree where this man's going to be executed, and it starts playing like 90s rock music. And these British soldiers come up and start stabbing this boombox with a bayonet. It's very goofy. And Jimmy helps Lieutenant William escape, gives him directions to get out of sight from the British, and he heads back to his own time, or more so chased back into his own time. And then as the climax ends, you kind of see that Jimmy might be back in his present day, and what he was being chased by is rather goofy. Mild spoiler, it's a random girl on horseback that just happened to be in the woods at the same time. And he's greeted by his crush. And he's given an opportunity to, maybe come clean. And then something may happen with that, and we get an implication of what's going to happen, and it might involve an item that he found in the story. And then, untypical of Are You Afraid of the Dark, there's like a narration of events from the person telling the story to kind of wrap up things that happen off screen, which is really annoying. And then the Midnight Society closes out the episode. And that's essentially what you're going to expect out of the Tale of the Long Ago Locket. So, I'm going to be upfront. This is not my cup of tea when it comes to kids' horror. And I'll explain why in a bit. Because I think that this episode was a big missed opportunity to pull something more Twilight Zone in nature. Even though it had that setup, it just didn't follow through with it in the best way. So, let's start off with some positives here. Jimmy, I didn't mention it because I've been saving it for this moment, was played by Will Friedle. If you don't know who Will Friedle is, he voiced Batman Beyond and the kids' WB cartoon Batman Beyond. He played Eric Matthews in Boy Meets World. He voiced Ron Stoppable and Kim Possible. The guy's a legend. He's an absolute, great voice actor, and he had a lot of fun roles back in the 90s. He starred in some Wonderful World of Disney movies like H.E. Double Hockey Sticks and My Day with the President's Daughter. I love those movies growing up. So seeing him in this role and like a very early bit role, right when Boy Meets World was kind of taking off, is really cool to see. It's always fun to see some star power that you recognize in these kids' horror shows. And I think his performance as Jimmy, it might have been corny and cringy at times with his character, given the material, but the performance was really nice. The man who played Lieutenant William, I don't know his name, he also played a character in an episode I recently covered called The Tale of the Last Dance. He played the stalker character in that episode, and he was here playing Lieutenant William, and he did a great acting performance. The costume design, making you feel like you're going back in time in the woods, while it's very, very low budget, it is kind of cool. I think the red coat outfits looked very authentic. Some shots of this episode was actually well done here as well. David Winning, he was able to create a very effective shot of them throwing a noose over a tree, and something about that was kind of creepy. And that's probably the scariest point of the whole episode. Very tense. And there's a scene where Lieutenant Williams tied up to that same tree. That's kind of cool. So I dug that. And I do like the premise involving history of this episode. This involves more historical horror fiction, and I think that's kind of cool. At least it's going for that. There's not enough historical horror. I'm always looking for that. I think one of my favorite examples I've come across in recent years is The Raven with John Cusack, this film that I found. I love stuff like that. And seeing Are You Afraid of the Dark kind of attempt that is really cool. I mean, I think the concept there could work. A time travel element could be fun and go back to the Revolutionary War. But it's everything in the execution and in the tone that really bother me, and it sinks it very low for me. Let's start off with the tone, because that's the easiest thing to beat up here. This episode is the definition of corny. When I think of every typical teenage, show from the early 1990s, they all have these Full House tropes on them. This is kind of like an honorary Full House episode, or it could be like some weird plot that they would have entertained for that show. Not saying that Full House is a bad show, trust me. I know it gets a lot of flack these days, but I grew up watching that show and I totally get it. It has an audience. But seeing all this stuff just pile on, like dealing with him having a crush on this girl and this other guy having possibly a crush on her, and you've seen all this stuff before, and it's played up very stereotypically, and the majority of the story is focused around that. If it's not saving this Lieutenant William guy, it's around this guy pining over this girl. And it wouldn't be as bad if they actually fleshed out the relationship a bit better, but the episode didn't focus on that enough to make me care for this couple, so it just came off really forced, or, just whatever. I wasn't invested into this relationship. I didn't have any stakes with it, so it just took me out of it a little bit. And the second biggest thing here, oh my lord, is the wasted setup of this, okay? So this is one of those episodes that is going for this Twilight Zone idea, and I can always appreciate it, even though it's very hit or miss with Twilight Zone ideas. Often than not, it's more middling for me, unless they do something really genius with it. And for a majority of this episode, I'm watching this and I'm like, well, he's getting friend-zoned by this girl. If he's going back in time and this Lieutenant William maybe mentions off to the side that he has a love interest and whatnot, why not have like a love interest in back in time for him, and give him like a stipulation where he has to come to an idea where if he wants to stay in the past to be with her, or maybe want to swap out his life presence to be with her in the past and let this man live in the future, or something like that maybe. Or maybe this man could be like his long lost relative, and what he's just stumbled across could alter history. And maybe he has to go through something harrowing to ensure that he dies so he doesn't mess up the history that brought him to existence. Because maybe if he lives on, other things would have happened differently. You could have gone way deeper with the idea. But like I said, it's just so surface level with it. And it doesn't help, which we're now getting into my third negative. When you when you're trying to sit there and dissect the story you are being presented with, there's just a lot of random goofy crap happening. Okay? There's a really over-the-top line delivery from Will Friedle. Even though, like I said, I love him, and he's talking about skating rinks to this girl, it's just ridiculous. There's a scene where he, like the classroom scene, when he's reading that passage about Lieutenant William. The way he stands up and just interrupts class is so over the top. Like, why is it being done like this? And then the scene where he brings the boombox into the woods. A bunch of redcoats hear the music, they go over, and I'm kidding you not, it spends about 10 to 15 seconds of actual film time. Of just the general sitting there squinting, and these extra soldiers in the back with gun bayonets stabbing the boombox in a very goofy way. Why? Just why? It's just goofy stuff like that make me laugh, but not in the good way, you know? And that kind of goes into like a full package negative here. It just feels like, why? Why is this in this show? Like, I can get the concept. It kind of fits into that bill. Granted, if you don't know who Gerald Wexler is, he wrote a very infamous episode not too long after this called The Tale of the Manaha. And judging by the 4 episodes he did write, yeah. Gerald Wexler, man, very inconsistent writer. I don't know if it was maybe Cinar or the production company or maybe DJ McHale himself that maybe put a stop to certain things that they wanted to do. I don't know. I've never seen the original script. But man, this was just a very lame script. It feels like all the textbook things in the 90s in like a DCOM way. This could have probably been a DCOM movie plot, or maybe a Wonderful World of Disney plot. And I don't know if it's because Will Friedle is in it, but it just has that vibe to it. I mean, there's really no stakes that you feel with the villains. You really don't feel like the main character, Jimmy, is ever in any real danger. Everything feels so overblown and kind of just blown out of proportion in like a teen lens, like woe is me crap. It's just, why? And that's how I feel about a lot of DCOMs. But I'm not trying to undersell DCOMs out there because some can be good, but this one feels like some of the weaker ones that I've seen, unfortunately. So yeah, it's a competently made story, I guess, but it just ended up being rather meh for me. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, with all those problems, I put it below a C, which a C for me begins at a 3.5 out of 5, so we're already below that. And where I settled with this was, you know, a D tier between a 3 to a 3.4. And I gave this a flat in the middle of that, a 3.2 out of 5 stars. It's meh, kind of bordering okay. It just feels underwhelming given all the circumstances of this episode. Could have been way better in the concept, could have been way scarier, been more Twilight Zone-like, less cliche, less corny, less woe is me, over dramatic, overdone. But it just wasn't. And I can totally see why this episode is not a... Well, I see a lot of people liking this episode in the Are You Afraid of the Dark fandom, but when people talk about some of the weaker ones, this is commonly thrown up down there. And I've seen quite a few people put this episode in the bottom 10 of the show, and I can kind of see why. It's not quite bad for me. It's not good, but it's not bad. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Tale of the Long Ago Locket. Let me know down in the comment section if you've seen this episode before. Do you love this or do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.